So just an apology note before we start, health and safety reminders. Noting that it's been some time since we've been in here. So toilets, as you know, just located down the hallway there. Evacuation, should there be an evacuation for any reason, please exit down the stairwell to the assembly point, which is the end of the car park space. Earthquake, dropping cover, all advised in situation. If necessary, once the shaking has stopped, we will evacuate down the stairwell without using the lift. Once again, medium speed car park. Phones, can you please turn your phones off to silent? And just remember that this is being recorded live and live streaming as well. So the only apology that I have is Worship Premier Gary Tom. He won't be joining us today. Leave of absence, any leave of absence requests. Any conflict of interest on the agenda items that we have in front of us today? There being none, then we'll move straight into the public forum to hear the submissions on the Stewart Island levy. So I think the first person is scheduled, which is John Spragan, the Stewart Island here, and he's going to join us by phone. So can you hear me, John?
Yeah, I can, Abel.
See you. And,
I can also see you.
it's a win-win situation. So the time's yours, John. You've got a 10-minute slot to make your submissions. Look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, well, it just seems that we're going down the same track that we've been a couple of times, but that's all right. As we've said in the past, the community board, while we're in favour of an increase in the levy, we're not in favour of the $10 one. We would be happy for the levy to go up to $10, but not to 15. In making our decisions, we came to the conclusion that over the years, there's been a review of the purpose of the levy, and it seems to have been widened to include a lot more than just basic infrastructure. And we think there's certain things that have been included in the background information for this that should not have been included. In particular, there's a feeling that things like in the waste services part of the funding of the background information, they've talked about the purchase of a new truck. Well, the waste services is a commercial operation, and such capital expenditures we feel should be taken from the charges that are made for the collecting of the rubbish and not charged against the actual visitor levy money. We also feel that in regards to DOC, any applications for upgrading tracks and things, they shouldn't be included. Some years ago, DOC gave away all their tracks that were in community board area that weren't in the national park and handed these over to the board, who maintain those now out of our rates. And we feel that DOC, from the charges on huts and things like this, should do all their own maintenance of the facilities within the national park. And also, anyone going directly into the national park doesn't pay a visitor levy anyway. So, it seems that they shouldn't be there. Another one that we've got here is the sewage one. This is based on a district-wide rate that we already pay here. And we don't believe that toilets on the island, although visitors use them, should be funded out of the visitor levy. They should be funded, like anywhere else in the district, out of that rate. It's been stated that there are a lot of projects that we need money for. And sure, the wish list of the community board is substantial, in particular in relation to wharves and to a certain degree footpaths. But these have been put into our long-term plan simply because over the years we've found that if they weren't there, we had a great deal of difficulty getting them added during the intervening years. So we put a huge wish list in this time, not expecting them all to be funded, but quite willing to accept that we've prioritised them, and that we'll take the funding for those that we're able to get funding for. And if we can't finance it this year, then we simply move it on to the next year and something comes off the far end. We feel that there is certain, that basically the fund should go for infrastructure wherever possible, that applications for wages or anything in this area shouldn't be allowed, that if an organisation is not able to budget to meet their expenses, then they should be reviewing their whole structure. They shouldn't be going to the visitor levy for funding. There's obviously a funding problem there for them. We're quite happy for such operational costs to be given just for 1 year, but not multiple years or multiple applications. We're also quite happy for the visitor levy to be extended, some applications to be able to be funded sort of for a 30-year period, in particular the major infrastructure ones where it will be necessary possibly to take out a loan. And by going through to a 30-year period, we're able to spread the cost of repaying that loan out over the whole period and across future users of it. It'd be worth noting here also that on the one particular on wharves, the board strongly feels that operators who utilise the wharf for their commercial operations should be paying a larger fee. It shouldn't be all funded by the community. The electricity one, which has come up several times, the board does not believe that funding for the power supply on the island should come from the visitor levy. Visitors are already paying for through their rental accommodation, through the shop prices, through anything they do over here. The power price is already built into it, and that's the way it should stay. We shouldn't be using visitor levy money to subsidise the power supply. We should be definitely looking for a different supply of power in the long term, but that's a different story. That's basically the board's attitude, that wherever possible, it should be for major infrastructure projects. And in particular, in our case, we would be looking at wharves and health and safety aspect of our roading, in particular in relation to the establishment of either concrete footpaths in the main township area or on the roads toward Horseshoe and towards Golden Bay, putting in what's called a track, which is just a wooden edged and gravel surfaced path. And by so doing, get the visitors off the road. As in particular in the survey running at the moment, we're getting quite a few comments of people growling that the cars on the island are going a bit fast, the roads are a bit narrow. So it would help alleviate that. I think that covers the main points.
Okay, thanks, John. Well presented as always. Just a point of clarification for myself. You indicated that the levy should be used for infrastructure and not for wages. But then you also went on to say that it could be used for operational costs for 1 year. What do you mean by that?
Well, I believe there's one or two organisations which have stated that originally when they were set up, have stated that they would be self-funding, but have found themselves a little bit in difficulty or wanting to extend hours and things. And the suggestion has been that they will go to the visitor levy for funding. Our attitude would be that if it was a complete necessity for them, then it should be for a brief period only, that they need to restructure their financial aspects and come back in and meet their budget without a applying to visitor levy for funding.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll open up for any questions and clarifications from councillors. Questions? Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, John. I noticed in your submission, or your written submission, you say that the board would support smaller incremental increases over time. How do you envisage that playing out?
We actually believe that, and I know we voted against it, that the period since the levy was established at $5 and today has been too long. What we would be willing, I think, to look at is that every 3 years, or that the possibility of looking at what costs have gone up and things, and perhaps taking that into consideration in relation to the actual levy.
Thank you.
Councillor Douglas.
So yeah, thank you, John. So you've indicated that you would support a levy increase to $10. What do you think?
$10, yes.
To $10, yes, not by $10. Now let's be clear on that. So what do you see as a negative by increasing it from $5 to $15?
We see it as a negative in return, that on the effect of the costs of coming to the island, that it pushes fares up to a point where it could turn people away, in particular people who are coming to the island for day trips, which is still a big market here on the island. We've been riding on the back of the COVID wave, where we've been having phenomenal attendance of people from New Zealand, but now that the country is opening up, is that going to continue? And I believe that, the airline, and I'm sure Raymond will talk about this later, is already worried about airfares, and I believe that Real New Zealand should be as well, because we're getting very close to $100 one-way ferry fare. And once you get into that 3 figures in the dollar column, people would, I believe, tend to look elsewhere.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for clarification?
So it's not, I don't believe in your submission, but I see a number of submitters have expressed concern about a charge on tradespeople going to the island. Do you have a comment on that?
Personal comment, it would be. I don't see a problem with that, because the tradesperson would, in the case of the ferry, we take them over at one of our cheaper rates, and we pay a visitor levy on it still, but they simply charge that back onto the customer on the island.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm fine.
All right, thanks for that, John, and once again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, excellent. The next submitter is Alistair Faulkner, and it's on page 99 of your agenda. Right, Alistair. Here, Alistair, I can see you're online.
Yep.
You will need to unmute yourself, and also your camera.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah, excellent. Well done. It's all yours. You can present your submissions.
Righty-ho. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. While agreeing with most of what Don Spraggan has just said, I believe the visitor levy should go up to $15. Simple reason being, there's a lot of costs onto the island for people who are not involved in, visitors coming over here. I understand that, putting the prices up for the ferries and things like that, ferries in the plains is a concern to a lot of people, and they, they're saying on the island that, hey, people won't come. Hell, I went to Rotorua to my daughter's graduation. I had to pay $25 to fly out of the airport. That was just one of the things that came to mind. There's other places, the Chatham Islands and places like that. They all have various taxes or various levies on, travelling to and from those places. If the people that are in the accommodation business or anything else are particularly concerned about a $10 increase, I guess they could also drop their fees to cover that cost. If they think that would make a difference to people coming over. But at the present time, the island's been, pretty well supported by the rest of New Zealand. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future now that this COVID thing seems to have settled down. With spending money on infrastructure and things like that, I believe that we should be using the visitor levy because basically 400 people living on the island don't do the damage to the road, don't require the power upgrades, don't require the sewage upgrades that are required by the visitors that are coming over here. So I would suspect that $15 would be the minimum that it should be raised to. So there is a lot of comments around on the island as where's this money going? This is an interesting thing because if you attend the meetings, the community board meetings, and also if you read the notice board, you'd probably find that information there. But people are suspicious, and a lot of them think that this money is being used for things other than on the island. I'll sort of try and point out that no, you can't do that. The rules state that the money must be spent over this way. But I'm just in full support of the visitor levy going to the $15. And as I say, if people are concerned about it in the accommodation sector, then maybe they could reduce their charges, which are pretty reasonable on the island compared with the rest of the country. So I don't think it's a problem. An extra $10 is very little. The other question is that I do have, though, and I haven't really received an answer for it, is what age does the visitor levy kick in? I understand children travel free. So from 0 to 17, I guess is still classed as a child. Do the Real New Zealand and the flights actually charge the visitor levy for people over, say, 14 or 15, where their prices go up? That's something I just haven't found an answer for. Thanks very much for listening. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Alistair, and well presented. So appreciate your time and your frankness and your comments. Been really appreciated. So I'll open the floor up for any questions, comments for Alistair. Okay, Alistair, appear to be no. Oh, yes, we are. Okay.
Just a comment, it's free to those under 18. They don't need to pay the visitor levy. Correct?
Is that still that's correct. Thanks.
Yeah.
You hear that, Alistair?
No, sorry, I missed that. What was the age cut off?
It's free to those under 18. They don't need to pay the visitor levy.
Okay, that's fine. I was just interested in that, what that age thing was, because a lot of people believe that the visitor levy kicks in when they pay an adult fare, which is 12 or 14 years old. So the actual cost for a family coming over generally is mum and dad will go up by $10.
Yes. Thank you for that. That's good clarification for yourself as well there, Alistair.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll certainly take on board your comments when we do our deliberations on the levy itself. So thank you very much for your time.
No problem.
Thanks, Alistair.
I'll hop over now because I think Graham Oakey's next online, so he's sitting in here too. So.
All right, then. Thanks, Andy. Graham, how are you?
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to this thing.
It's all yours.
Right. I definitely think it needs to go up. I'm ambivalent as to how much. My own personal view, sorry, I'll actually say that I work for Thornton Hogan on the island and see a lot of the wear and tear that happens in maintenance because of locals and visitors. I believe whatever it goes up to, half the amount should go to SDC for their maintenance costs on the island. An example of why I say that is that last week, Easter weekend, the power consumption in our sewer pump stations doubled from the previous week. That's an operating cost as well as all the other costs of wear and tear based on those hours. Probably a similar thing could be stated about roading, although it's a lot harder to identify. And these aren't one-off costs, these are ongoing costs. One of the previous meetings about visitor levy money, I suggested if they looked at the cost of the power consumption in the sewer system, would give you some idea of the cost of tourism to Stewart Island based on the winter versus summer costings. COVID has put a big stamp on that now because we really haven't had a winter season for a couple of years now. I completely agree with Spraggan about the track thing. SDC money is used for SDC tracks. Dock should spend their own money on their tracks, especially when they gave them back to SDC. Sorry, I'm just going to look at my notes here. When the visitor levy original talk shows, promotion shows, whatever came out, we were told, to the best of my memory, it was going to be to alleviate some of the costs to ratepayers of tourism on Stewart Island. When it came out, and one of the very first application meetings we had at Lions, we were told it could only be used to enhance the visitor experience, which is quite a bit different to alleviate some of the costs to ratepayers on Stewart Island. I see in the latest first edition, it says, available to support activities and facilities for the benefit of visitors to Stewart Island and activities and facilities that mitigate the adverse effects of visitors on the environment. That still doesn't go back to what I believe were originally sold on, of alleviating some of the costs to Stewart Islanders, ratepayers that is. So I believe without doing any sort of work on it, probably half of any, whatever the dollar value is, should go to SDC to assist with the maintenance costs caused by visitor usage of the island. This would be in particularly sewer, roading, and, for example, toilets. We wouldn't have a toilet structure at Golden Bay and a pump station there if we didn't have, it was put there particularly for tourism. Possibly the toilet at Horseshoe Bay is the same. And I also agree a lot more regular reviews. Then we may not get the sort of dollar shock going from say $5 to $10 or $5 to $15 based on the rising costs of things. But my particular point was I believe at least a good proportion of the money should go to SDC and be completely transparent about where it gets spent, but for ongoing maintenance issues caused by tourism or increased maintenance issues caused by tourism. And that's just based on what I see and get told at my job. We don't actually directly look after the sewer scheme, but the winter summer cost historically pre-COVID was always there. And then the other day I got saw the figures for 2 pump stations. They were literally double in running hours, which is electric cost, which is a maintenance cost on those pumps. And at the moment that's completely borne by the ratepayers of actually Southland as well as Stewart Island. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Graham, and I think it's certainly appreciated that to hear from you because you've got the hands-on experience. You see it every day, and you can see the difference between, like you say, the winter and summer. You can see the utilisation of the power consumption. You can see the effect that it has on the roads. So it's having that first-hand knowledge is certainly very useful for you to pass that on to us. I'm sure every councillor around the table will be very appreciative of those comments. Thank you for that. I'll open it up for any questions. Graham? Yes, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. Good morning, Graham. I noticed in the question to do with the possibility of multi-year funding in exceptional circumstances up to 30 years, you said you're unsure, but I'm sure you probably have some thoughts on it, one way or the other, or perhaps on both sides of it.
I think we have to go there because of the cost of these things, and I think, like it or not, we have to go there.
Thank you. Good.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Ford.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Part of your mention there about the use of levy for community things. In the legislature, originally they were specific that it was to be used for visitor related, so as to try and keep the collectors on side, because the collectors were touchy about being open slather. So the reasoning was sound reasoning behind that. So, but that was the original legislation.
Yeah, I understand you've got to sell the product. But to me, the product as a ratepayer was sold to me on the basis it would alleviate some of the costs to Stewart Island ratepayers of tourism. And I don't think we're quite there yet. The improvements we're getting through it are good on the whole. The point I would make about footpaths is that there almost needs to be a separation between the road and the footpath. A good example of that is, say, the new Horseshoe Bay footpath extension. You don't get many people walking on the road there. The footpath, which is like a road shoulder extension on Golden Bay Road, you still get acres of people walking over the road, and you get cars parking on the footpath like it is a shoulder extension. It looks like a shoulder extension. It doesn't actually look like a footpath. It does make it a bit safer, I believe, a bit, not a lot.
Valid point, very valid. Further questions for Graham? No further questions there, Graham. So once again, really appreciate your time and your effort to put your submissions in, and then now making time to speak to your submission as well. So many thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and this is not my comfort zone, and I've survived. Thank you, cheerio.
It's all good. Thank you very much. We have the next presenter is Anne Pullen.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Morning, Anne. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
We've been round this road many times before, and here we go again on another roundabout. I think the levy is a wonderful idea. It supports the island in so many ways. As for it going up, I think if it goes up, and however much it goes up by, there's got to be very much a settled idea of what the money is actually going to be spent on. Because yes, the toilets, the Wi-Fi, all the things that the tourists enjoy and expect when they come here, I think that's yes, that's a must. After that, I think it's got to be very definite as to what the money is being raised for. My pet subject is footpaths. I understand, I appreciate the need for footpaths in places. The need for a footpath to Horseshoe Bay, if it's anything like the footpath from Carmi Road down to the Black Bridge, it is an absolute eyesore. You could just about take a car down there. It's an eyesore, and I would hate to think that a footpath like that went all the way to Horseshoe Bay. I think something that is very important for the island. Yes, people walk in the road. I will totally agree with that. But if the traffic and the people that are in the cars respect the fact that we are a tourist destination where a lot of people go walking, there is far too many cars on the island, and they go far too fast. And I think that's a very important part of the whole scenario with raising money and what money is spent on. If I'm very much in favour of a percentage each year going for power and sewerage. I think a percentage should be allocated because that benefits the tourists as well as the locals. But, you know, I think that the levy is a great idea, but it's got to be known what it's going to be raised for before it's raised ad hoc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I don't think anybody would disagree with you. We need to clearly identify why we're raising the levy in the first place. So I'll open up for any questions to Councillor Harper.
Yes, and thank you for your presentation. You spoke on cars going far too fast. Have you actually observed the drivers? Are they local visitors or general? Are they going too fast for you to see?
Most of them. Most of them, yes. But the other thing is the tourist drivers tend to be going probably a bit slow and all over the road because they're looking at the scenery. Driving here, I mean, I don't drive a car. I drive a quad bike, so probably I'm dangerous on the road too. Who would? But at least I don't go try and beat the speed limit or anything like that, and I stick to the side of the road. So it's a little bit of both. Locals too fast, tourism all over the road because they're looking at the scenery.
Yep, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I live in a tourist town, so I can certainly relate to what you're talking about. Absolutely. And people go to the island and they're relaxed and they're looking at the scenery, and
yes,
they do walk all over the road. And as you say, they're just too busy looking at the wonderful scenery you've got there. And the locals are busy running their business, and they have a totally different focus. So totally understand where you're coming from. Any further questions?
Well, thank you. So you mentioned the speed limit. Do you have a comment on what the speed? Well, tell me what the speed limit is now, and would you like to see it changed?
Well, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to bring it down, but then, you know, it's not for me to say because I don't drive a car. So, but I think people have got to respect, locals have got to respect that they live in a tourist town, whether they like it or not. And in a tourist town where people are encouraged to go walking, they've got to expect people around the next corner. So defensive driving. Don't just drive because if you drive 50k an hour, don't drive 50k just because you can. Be prepared.
As you've indicated, the island itself is experiencing a real change because you've got such an influx of tourists. Therefore, your culture within the tourism itself is changing on the island. So it makes sense. Councillor Ford, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Very good. I just wonder if you'd be interested in supporting a reduction in speed limit to 30 k's, and bearing in mind that we have 800 cars.
Yes,
that's the competition that's going on. I would just like you to suggest that council might hear that. And
yes,
as well.
I think that would be an excellent idea, and I'd certainly support that. And the thing is, we are not suddenly a tourist destination. We have been a tourist destination for the last century. but every decade it changes. And of course, now it's changing because everybody has cars. Nobody is prepared to walk the same. So every crib owner, every holiday home, they all have cars. So to me, that is something that's got to be addressed, as well as instead of footpaths.
Thank you. Interesting concept. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Anne. Just a question regarding the question we asked in the survey about the multi-year funding up to 30 years for exceptional circumstances around infrastructure. And you sort of asked what. I suppose an example of that could be a jetty or something that's got a long life and a high funding requirement. So
Yes.
you have a comment on that?
No, yes, I'd be all for that. But I think a percentage for long funding would go into power and sewage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I understand. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any further questions for? There's no other questions for you, Anne, so I really appreciate your time. And
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Some interesting ideas as well. So thank you for those. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
have a nice day. Cheers. So we'll Sherry and Helen are not attending. So we go back to Aaron Joy, and it's on page 189 of your agenda. Good morning, Aaron. How are you? Here, Aaron. You're on mute. Here we go.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Don't know what's happening here.
You're
I can
very
see you
still,
guys.
Aaron.
Is that better?
Oh, we can hear you.
I
I
can-
can hear anything, but your camera doesn't seem to be working. But that's okay. We can hear you. That's the main thing.
Okay, I can see you, so I'm not too sure what's happening here. No. Anyway, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to submit. So I am a business owner on Stewart Island. So we have the largest accommodation facility. I'm also chair of Stewart Island Promotions. So it's a mixed hat that I wear. I am quite concerned about an increase in levy. We get a lot of, sure there is a need for uplifting the visitor experience, but I'm also it gets a bit murky is the fact that rates, we come under the Southland rate, so our rates go into a pool, and the definition of what rate spending is. I get concerned that, all our jetties need work on. So it's clearly an asset management problem that hasn't been really addressed properly over the years. So now there's this catch up happening, and suddenly it looks like, okay, the easy way to get some money for the island is increase the levy. We get a lot of feedback now. It is getting a dearer destination to attend, and I get concerned that we could, by increasing the levy too much, affect the visitor numbers to the island. We've got clear numbers pre-COVID of visitors to the island. We've got some clear numbers of COVID when New Zealanders couldn't go overseas, so they visited here. So the long term is a concern. Will we get the numbers when the country opens up fully again? I think, in my opinion, the internationals, it won't be till spring or Christmas before we really see numbers coming back from overseas. So my big concern was, while I might support a slight increase in the visitor levy, I also believe that the Southland District Council hasn't done a proper asset management program over the years, and we could be copying a bit of that now. The footpaths are a problem on the island. It needs a footpath from Dundee Street through to the main road. That is a real concern for me. People just walk all over the roads there. That's a health and safety problem. I think that was earmarked to be done last year and it never happened. And but that to me is an immediate requirement. Yeah, so I'm open to questions anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Appreciate your comments. So happy to open up. Yes, Councillor Harper.
Yes, Aaron, thank you for your submission. We have a lot of backpackers and stuff staying at your place that will stay on the island for multiple days. Would this be correct?
We do. Our demographic of people staying has been a wee bit longer lately with the New Zealanders. The cost of coming down here, the New Zealand market is definitely, let's stay 2 or 3 days longer, where the backpacker market originally was in, walk the track out. So they are staying longer, which also has more of an effect on facilities. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. When asked what you thought the levy should be, you have got unsure there. So after delivering your submission, and have you firmed up which levy increase,
I think
which levy amount you would support?
I would support a $10 levy, but anything above that is, I think we're starting to get on dangerous ground. You've got to remember that internationals pay $35 on arrival into New Zealand, and if everywhere around New Zealand charges levies, then it becomes quite a complicated destination for people to visit. I think visiting the island, people would be open to $10, but no more than that. I think you're entering really dangerous ground, to be honest.
Thank you.
Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. Good morning, Alistair. You made a mention about the jetties. You'll be aware that Southland District relatively recently took over those jetties from Environment Southland, and we got them in the condition they're in. So it's not really Southland District failing as far as the jetties are concerned.
Yeah, but it's still one of those who ran the asset management program for the jetties over the years, and this is what's happening. You know, Southland's got a problem with their bridges right through the whole area. It's been a lack of foresight. My personal view is that anyone who uses a jetty should pay just a small $2 fee. It'll all mount up. But the jetties need attention, and if we don't have those jetties right, then the visitor experience declines, and it's a health and safety issue as well. The cost of building jetties varies. I've heard some prices of what, you know, locals could do it against what the council does it. So I think there needs to be a bit of debate about, you know, there's some experienced people on the island who can really build a jetty very well. I thought Port William, I think, got built for $130-something thousand, and that's a very good jetty. So I think there has to be more input from local experience, and that would reduce costs of building jetties as well.
Councillor Scott.
Good morning, Aaron. Just that footpath and Dundee Street that you mentioned, how do you think that should be funded when it does, or if it does get done?
Well, that to me could be a visitor levy expense, because it's tourists that walk all over the road there, and it's got that bit of hill in the middle by Bain Motel, and they just walk all over the road, and someone one day will get clipped, and then the shit will hit the fan. And so having a footpath from on the Bay Motel side right through to Main Road would enhance that and reduce the health and safety risk.
Thank you. Aaron, could I just explore some of your earlier regards to you as a chair of the promotion and the number of visitors coming to the island. When I hear other parts of New Zealand looking at how they want to manage their visitors in the future, it seems to be a view that less numbers is better. Excuse me. And we're looking at, say, the higher spend person coming to New Zealand and travelling through New Zealand and staying longer, enjoying the experience, and probably in all probability spend a little bit more money. So if you reduce the numbers going to the island, you could reduce the pressure on some of the infrastructure, and you'll have people that will stay there longer and probably spend a little bit more money. What's your view on that?
My personal view is that, in all due respect, I think the minister has got this area a bit wrong. With overseas visitors, like New Zealanders love going to Europe for their OE, and that's like the rite of passage. And there's the Germans, the Dutch, all come here as backpackers, and it's like their rite of passage, it's their OE. So the Germans specifically, sometimes after they leave high school, they do a gap year, or after they've finished their studies, they do a gap year. Now that's clearly what's happened, and those people always have a year's work visa, and they're the ones that go around New Zealand, they work and they travel. So they might work 2 months, then they travel, then they settle somewhere and work another 2 months. Now that's a huge market within New Zealand, and New Zealand has clearly lacked that market, and we've seen all the growers crying out for pickers. They're the backpacker market. Yeah, and then when they've done their work and then they decide to travel, the last bit of travel, quite a lot of them used to come down here and visit the island. So while the government may be looking at the high-end market, they've also got to be open to that the important part is the backpacker market as well. Not just because we own a backpackers, but because Europeans come here as their rite of passage. And so it's got to be a mixed, it's got to be a balanced tourism group that we get to New Zealand, not just high end.
Okay.
If they want high end, they'll go to Queenstown, they'll go to Rotorua, and would they come down here? Not too sure.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting view. So any other questions? Hey, thanks, Aaron. Appreciate your time and your submissions.
Thank you.
And yeah, as I say, really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. The next person is Elaine Hamilton from Zoom, page 191 on your submission. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the visitor levy. I do support the visitor levy and always have done, but I do not support it being higher than $10. I think just because you can get money this way, you don't necessarily have to. And I think anything higher will make it look as being rather greedy. I know we need facilities, and if it involves health and safety matters, well, then that's a good idea. But I don't think we should sort of spend beyond our means and having things that might be nice to have, but don't necessarily need. Now, one of the things that's happened has been the footpath down into the Old Mill Creek. And while it does get used, don't particularly like it myself, but it is probably necessary. But meanwhile, on the other side of the road, you've got the water table there, which has never been touched and is completely filled with grass. So you're sort of, to me, seem to be doing something on one side and then not even bothering with the other side. The best thing that ever happened on the island was the lawns, the grass being mowed on the sides of the roads. This was definitely made it safer for vehicles and for people walking. It's also better for kiwi spotting. I mean, if you've got people out with their torches wandering through long grass, trying to actually see kiwis and the car goes past, it's not a good safety issue. And probably the other thing is there's too many cars here anyway now, and I'm not sure how you get around that. Probably with people applying for funding, I definitely wouldn't be happy if the Department of Conservation did so, when to me they seem to get an awful lot of funding from government anyway. That's just a personal view. And I wonder what the advertising for all this does cost. That would be my query. I mean, I've heard it advertised on Talkback Radio at 11 o'clock at night, 2 and 4 in the morning, and I can't see the point of that personally. That's probably about all I've got to say.
Well, that's very good, thank you. Appreciate your time. I'll open up for any questions from the councillors. Yep.
If I may. Morning, Elaine. I noticed on the question about the 30-year funding, for exceptional instances of infrastructure, you've said you're unsure. Do you have some thoughts, perhaps thinking about it a bit further?
Possibly not, because I took that to mean the whole of the Southland area. And I can't.
It's just specific items on Stewart Island of a longer term, probably a jetty would be an example.
Well, yes, but I feel that's a bit out of my league, but of course the Port William one is absolutely excellent. And of course there should be good jetties. I mean, after all, visitors come here to go and see these places. I think you don't want to lose what they come here for, and it's all very well having footpaths, say to Horseshoe Bay or whatever, but people like meandering around the sides of the beaches and side of the roads, and as long as there's plenty of space there, I can't see the problem. But we don't want to lose what they come here for.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Oh, no, thank you. I'm right. I could forward on it.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Elaine. Appreciate your time and speaking to your submission. So many thanks, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Righto. Cheers.
If you go, then Margaret will talk on it.
Organising the traffic. Hello, Margaret. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. So it's your time, so please go ahead.
Right, well, I'm very supportive of the visitor levy, and I think it's a really good thing for Stewart Island. And as far as the increase goes, I would agree that it should go up. I mean, it's been nearly 10 years now, and it makes sense that $5 today doesn't buy what $5 did back then. I'd not like to see it go as high as 15. I think that would affect families and some people that might consider coming to the island, but $10 is a reasonable increase. I just think that the key thing is that we shouldn't be increasing the money just because, and I think we should learn to live within our means. Some of the projects that have gone on, I think, the money, I mean, just because the money's there, you shouldn't dream up projects, if you can understand where I'm getting at. I did look and see recently where there were plans to build a new track in Baker Park on Stewart Island. Well, I think that's just an example of stupidity. That's dreaming up a project that's both unnecessary and expensive and commits the council to long-term expenditure trying to maintain it. And heaven knows we've got enough tracks on Stewart Island already. I just think that's one kind of flippant project that needn't happen. And another one is, I know there's been applications in the past for assistance towards a platform at Observation Rock. Well, again, I think there's absolutely no need for it. It's a perfectly good lookout point. It's not dangerous. And I think you can't keep building things like that I mean, people say it's for a safety thing, but we don't have any record of people falling off Observation Rock in the last 100 years that I know of. So really the key thing, yes, for me is to make sure that the projects that the money's going towards are sensible and necessary for visitors. I think the operational funding has been a great asset, especially for the likes of the museum, which does have very high costs. And we have noticed, of course, that it is the major tourist attraction on the island now, second to Ulva Island. So, yes, the 30-year funding thing, I can see the reasoning in that when you've got major infrastructure projects like wharves and jetties going on, that you do need to be assured that you can keep up the payments for those.
Thank you, Margaret. Really appreciate your comments. Just one observation to health and safety. When you made the reference to the platform, we can't really wait until somebody does fall off it. We can take responsible actions to ensure that that area is safe. And an onus of responsibility that falls on the council.
For me, I mean, personally, I look at it, it's a natural rock outcrop that people go and stand on and look. You can't go around making everything safe. It's like tramping tracks. I think people should have more common sense and use them at their own risk.
I don't disagree with what you're saying.
I mean, I think if they fall off, in some respects, it's natural selection. They shouldn't be so.
Good on you.
Well said.
And I mean, and the other thing is like the footpaths over here. You know, no doubt footpaths are needed in some areas, but the footpath going down to Mill Creek, built with the assistance of the visitor levy, is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Here you've got a footpath that's built to mainland standards. It's extremely wide. It's nearly as wide as the road, in case some of you hadn't seen it. And people are still walking on the road, and it looks completely ugly. And I know it's meant to be practical, but we could have just had a single lane footpath going down there that would have kept the, the nature of the island and kept people safe. And you look across the other side of the road, and there's the water table that's never been cleared in years and years. It's completely covered in water, and weeds, and it's not doing its job, but that's been ignored. So it's just an observation. I'd hate to see more of those big wide footpaths. I would like to see sensible Stewart Island ones that fit in with the island, but also allow people to walk. They don't need to walk 3 abreast.
Good point. Very valid. Yeah, that's excellent. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Ford.
Thanks, Margaret. Just a comment that the Observation Rock platform is a dock asset, and we all know what dock do with their assets, and they tend to overmake them. So I think it's on their desk, not ours. Although it had some funding from visitor levy to aid that. So that had been approved through the board, and a dock application, common public use, but certainly dock wouldn't want anybody to fall over the side, would they?
No.
But, oh well, I guess that's something people should take up with Doc if they're not in agreement with what they're doing.
Yep, Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm just interested in exploring, you mentioned that you felt comfortable with the funding going towards, the levy funding going towards operating costs, and that's sort of a little bit different from what we've been hearing from some others. So I'd just be interested in hearing your sort of thoughts on that. What sorts of things, operating costs, do you see as being reasonable?
The only one that I can relate to really is the museum. Like our annual operating costs, if you take into account diesel for heating, power, wages, they come to around $100,000 a year. And while we've not been badly affected by COVID, because our visitor numbers have kept on steadily coming in, I just think that the money, like we didn't apply last year, but we've applied last year. We thought we would try and show that we don't want to be always having our hand out, but you know, an amount to go towards operating costs would be really useful for us. And we have a never-ending stream of people at the museum coming in to use our free toilets. So, you know, we have cleaning costs and stuff that are directly tourist related. So in that respect, operational costs for things like that, I think are necessary.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Margaret. That water table that you talked about going down to Mill Creek, do you see that as something that the levy should be paying to keep and sort out?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I just question, you know, the nature of that structure, you know, the actual size of it. I think once built, it should become a community expense. Personally, yeah, I don't think that should be dipping into the visitor levy all the time for maintaining some of those things. I mean, every now and then, maybe if needed.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Margaret? Thank you, Margaret. There's no further questions for you, and certainly appreciate your time. And we'll be taken on board, I'm sure. Thank you very much. Okay. Have a nice day. Cheers.
Thank you.
Wilfred. Sit up here, please.
Has anybody read by any chance this book about Rakiuba, the history of Stewart Island? Well, it's a little bit where I base it on. And I have this made inviting, but don't worry about it. It's far beyond this two-page paper. But I start reading it: against exploitation of Rakiuba, Stewart Island, and marginalization of Rakiuba, Stewart Island community. I live now on Stewart Island for more than 30 years. And if anything comes out of this, it shows me that living on this island and participating and seeing what's going on gives you a totally different perspective than looking from the outside onto this island and making decisions about what happens on the island on any level. If it's the interaction with the locals, if it's an infrastructure project, it's how people make their living, if how they treat tourists or how they go about it. You can't really have even an idea how things are done and how they are handled when you live in the place. And that's my main thing. Living on Stewart Island is a different experience than living somewhere else, but making decisions affecting the lives and livelihoods of residents on the island. And that is the key problem and the key issue. Who makes a decision which affects Stewart Island? Living on the island is for many a matter of choice, but for nearly 30% of the current residents in 2022, it is their family history having lived on the island for more than 3 to sometimes 9 generations. I'm trying to get the data from anywhere in New Zealand, but so far I have not found any community which has a longer history in one place living than the majority of people on Stewart Island of 30%. You go normally and change houses. When we lived in Christchurch for a while, on average, our neighbors lived 5 years at their house, and then they moved on, the so-called property ladder. Even that happens on Stewart Island, but within a circle of 2 kilometers. So you are still together with the same people. The life on Stewart Island and being based there and having grown up there, and your family has been living there not just for 1 generation, but for 2 generations and more generations, and wants to live there and have chosen to live there. I don't think we have many people in Invercargill who have that sort of history and connection with their family being in this place for so long, and except probably from some farming communities. Now, when we ourselves arrived on Stewart Island in 1990, 65% of the residential homes of all the houses on Stewart Island were owned by residents on Stewart Island. The fishing industry and aquaculture was owned in the majority by Stewart Islanders, Stewart Island fishermen who also developed aquaculture. And the ferry and plane services were at least co-owned by Stewart Islanders, and also the new infrastructure, the so-called Stewart Island Electricity Supply Agency or authorization, was of course owned and controlled by Stewart Island. That was when we came there 32 or 33 years ago. Now, it turned around, only 35% of all the residential properties are owned by Stewart Islander. 65% are about holiday makers and people who come there to the island for less than a total of 6 weeks per year. It's interesting that they own also the majority of our cars we have on Stewart Island. I mean, imagine that we have 400 permanent residents and we have 800 plus cars. Then fishing and aquaculture, as well as tourism, are also now dominated and controlled by up to 80% of known island-based businesses like Stanford and like Real New Zealand. I don't know where they pay their tax, but I'm absolutely sure they don't pay their tax on Stewart Island. And they make the biggest money on their operations, what they make on Stewart Island, but the revenue is not being on the island, the revenue is somewhere else, except for the work people they have there and spending their money, which is in comparison peanuts. Then coming back to CIESA, our great electricity scheme in the 1990s, when everybody told me, if you can, half a year ago, we had a generator shed, everybody had to have a generator. And if you have a good wife, she would even do the dynamo on the, on the bicycle if you want to have a cup of tea. That was a joke at the time when we came in 1990. Now, when we came there, we had an electrician. I forgot what was his name, Peter?
Wilson.
Peter, no, not Ian, the father of Ian Wilson, but he was dead then. And there was another new guy who came with his family and had a son on the island. He was the electrician. There was somebody else helping at the generator shed. And he did also, in addition, all the necessary electrical work on the island. And at the time, 50% of cost for the energy was the price for diesel. And 50%, so to speak, was a margin of administration and other infrastructure. Now we have a system whereby we have engineers, whereby we have administration, and only 1/4 of the actual power price is based on the fuel price, and 3/4 are priced for different reasons, which have been come about through regulationary requirements from the mainland. That means what happens on the mainland and you transfer to the island doesn't work. The same thing with our traffic system and with when we are talking about the speed limit on Stewart Island. We have a great cop. I personally really like him, and I think he is doing a fantastic job. But it's a spectacle when we see that every time we see the blue lights and we have a speaker is when he gives a parking ticket. I mean, you should have that here in Invercargill. Please get the wardens who give you traffic tickets for illegal parking on Stewart Island, a flashing light and a siren and a speakerphone that all of Invercargill people can enjoy getting a parking ticket. That is how it looks on Stewart Island. I mean, I understand we are all in one country. And what is in Stewart Island has to be also commutable to Invercargill and to Auckland and to everything else. But it really is absurd to what kind of picture and impression it comes on a small island. Now, coming back, we have now Bruce Ford here as a Stewart Island councillor. And we had also Spraggan here. He told me that some weeks ago, the head of the community board. And they both tell me that they get overvoted by you guys who are not living on Stewart Island and have an opinion, and that is being overridden, the voices and our representation from Stewart Island. And I want to challenge that. I really believe, yes, to the visitors levy, I'm coming to that.
That's a good idea, because I was just going
The visitors-
to remind you the purpose of
The purpose of my thing is that the visitors levy is a resource of the island, like fishing, like aquaculture, tourism. And this visitor levy should be determined by the people of Stewart Island, and it shouldn't be determined by people who don't live on the island. And there is another argument, there is a constitutional argument. The constitutional argument is, how did Stewart Island become part of New Zealand? I don't know if you ever realized that Stewart Island was part of New Zealand as a treaty, but not seen as being part of New Zealand in form that the residents of Stewart Island and the squatters and European settlers were affected by them.
Manfred,
So therefore,
I like that. We don't really require a history lesson. I would really like you to focus on your visitor levy. What you're trying to
Okay, I say no decision regarding the visitor levy should be taken until a formal review has been undertaken of the constitutional aspect regarding the status of Rakiura Stewart Island and its participation in decision-making of the island affairs, if in local, regional, and national government. And I want also to come to Mr. Duffy, who told before in a very enlightening comment that the recent overtaking of wharves and jetties by Environment Southland. And I don't know if you know, Mr. Duffy, that you didn't take them over from Environment Southland. You took them over from Southport. And Southport was the institution which was formed from the Harbour Board. So the idea of jetties and anything on Stewart Island waterway related it was one big thing, and that was transferred to Southport. And then they concentrated on the money-making commercial wharves as it was as a business and neglecting all this infrastructure until they got a deal with Southland District Council to take them over in the state they are. And all the money which is now required to develop those wharves, to make them up to standard, is now being said, the user pays, we want now everybody to pay for the use of the Yeti. When the original idea was, when it was transferred, that all those infrastructures would be paid for by the revenue made of everything, including the commercial wharves. What an idiocy to tell us we have to pay for our wharves when the commercial viable wharves, namely, but the Half Moon Bay wharf is kept for Southbound. It makes revenue for Environment South. I don't know that any Stewart Islander has a seat on Environment Southland, nor is distributing the income of the wharves in Southport to Stewart Island. But Environment Southland does it. And that is the crux of the matter. You deplete Stewart Island systematically of all its resources, and the breadcrumbs which are left over are paid by the residents for the beautiful saying, user pays. And this is totally unfair. You can't deplete an island and either privatize or take the assets in control outside the island and let us as residents to pay for the rest. And then come to us and say, oh, you have so many visitors. Why can't we have a visitors levy and go in?
Another 2 minutes.
No, I don't want to take your time for this. You got my point. My point is you have to rethink the whole concept of Stewart Island being ruled and being dominated and being decided about from outside Stewart Island. That hasn't worked for the last 30 years since I am there, and it's going further downhill. And that's the problem. And therefore, I urge you, don't go further that path, because it only leads to more conflict. You have to rethink if Stewart Island should have a different way of being dealt with. Thank you.
Any questions? Verification? Councillor Owen.
Just a suggestion, Manfred, that a lot of the stuff that you've talked about today will be really useful to feed back to the current review of local government.
Exactly. I would like to make a submission to the local government for this. I know about those plans, and I know that we have probably an election where the last representation of Stewart Island is going to be elected, and then after that not. And I think we should also involve the Ombudsman, but I also think we are going to the Human Rights Commission. Because a community with this sort of historic standing and interracial relationships and families should be protected. Stewart Island is an icon and is so special that it shouldn't be wasted away and ignored in its uniqueness.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Just a comment. Comment really, man. Thank you for that. I enjoyed.
Question. You got a question?
That's a comment.
Right. Question. Question for clarification.
Let's see if there's a question at the end. And the themes that you talked about resonate with me, and I think a lot of people, and we see it. We're quite aware of this theme on Stewart Island, but I see that similar theme across Southland, and I think it's happening across the country. And
yes.
So yeah, thank you very much for coming in, sharing that with us.
Thank you. Any other?
Please allow me one final remark. I really appreciate everybody here in person, and I think you are always and totally trying to do your best. And I don't feel that any of you or who else I had dealings with did anything consciously with the detriment of Stewart Island. But I really like to tell you, it's difficult to understand. And it's so much more difficult to understand Stewart Island when you are not living on the island. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Manfred. Appreciate your time and your presentation. The next submitter is Paul Morris, joining us by Zoom. On page 299 of your report. Morning, Paul. How are you?
Good, thanks. Able, councillors.
Good
Can
to
you
see
hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. So please go ahead and present your submission, Paul.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for giving me the time to present on behalf of my company that I work for, LNZ. And obviously we are a large player within the Rakiura Stewart Island region. So look, I'm going to take obviously our submission as read, but I just want to sort of call out one or two areas within it just to put a bit of focus on. One's that in principle, LNZ supports an increase in the visitor levy, as the current levy rate is not resulting in the collection of sufficient monies to fund tourist activities and infrastructure on Rakiura. So we agree in principle that there needs to be a look at the amount that is paid towards visitor, contributing towards the facilities that they use on the island. So we have no issues with that part of it. But we more want to focus on a couple of areas. That the levy amount should be two-tiered. That's in part of our submission. The seasons are very different down there. The visitors, and I'm probably talking more in the aspect here of not so much in the current COVID times that we've been in over the last couple of years, but more so in relation to when we will have a typical sort of international tourism market visiting our shores again. And we see that the summer season, which will be more international tourist based, visiting the Rakiura for the walks and the other natural attractions that they go there for, is quite a different. They're there in our summer season, but not at all in any real numbers through the winter months. And our suggestion was that a levy that could be tiered towards a summer season being, we would suggest October to April, and a winter season being May to September. And you'll see in our submission at the moment, we're suggesting $10 in summer and $7 in winter. There's no doubt that the island, we believe, will continue to be busy with international markets when it comes back. We appreciate it's been busier than we probably most of us would have anticipated during the COVID times, but it's been great that there's been opportunity for domestic New Zealanders to visit the island. But we actually see that there will be a trend back to more traditional travel patterns, which will, over the years ahead, with international tourists coming back more in the summer seasons. But the opportunity for the island is to try and attract more domestic business through the winter months. And I think that all of us need to work towards what we can do to sort of encourage those visitors to come between that May and September period. Certainly, we know that we have to put competitive rates into our products to get people to visit through those winter periods. And we believe that the visitor levy should form part of that sort of, I guess, marketing tool with a slight reduction through the winter months to help keep the promotion of the island from a viability point of view and as a way for businesses to extend their businesses out into the winter months and instead of just that traditional summer season. So that's one point I just wanted to highlight. And another area was we believe that there should be a $5 increase to $10, but that the levy should be reviewed in 5-year periods. I guess most of us can look back over 5-year terms in our life and we just see the amount of change that occurs. And having that ability to have a review done on a 5-yearly period is, we believe, in a more appropriate measure rather than going from a $5 figure to a proposed $15 figure, but more 5 to 10. And I might add with this, not necessarily saying that it would go up again in 5 years' time, or it potentially could go down depending on what is happening in the local environment and the region and what is needed to support Rakiura Stewart Island as a location. So I think having a more managed approach to setting of the levy and some periods of time that are looked at, and we're suggesting 5-year periods, that there's a review done and rates adjusted accordingly would be a more appropriate way to match what's happening in the in relation to not only the infrastructure needs of the island, but also in relation to the travelling visitors that could be visiting islands. It's very hard to look even 5, 10, 15 years out and just assume that life's going to be the same. We've all experienced that in the last 2 or 3 years. And so we shouldn't just assume that it's right to set things for a longer period. There should be review periods, which is typical, as most of us know, in rentals and leases and things like that. So our suggestion would be a 5-yearly review of the visitor levy. It would be the way forward. So those are the key points I just wanted to add or put a bit of sort of weight onto our submission, and happy now to take any questions that any councillors may have in relation to our submission.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate your time and presenting your submission. So it's really good. I'll open up for any questions. When you, I'll start it off with your suggested 5-year review period. Do you see that the adjustment occurs in the 5th year? Because if you do the review in the 5th year, it doesn't take effect until the 6th year.
I would say that
you review it in 4 years and then make the adjustment in the 5th year.
Correct. Ava, that's how I'd see it, is that you'd be opening up discussions probably 18 months out, with, let's say, a decision made 12 months out and an introduction at a 5-year period. So if we use the example, there was going to be an October 23 date, it would obviously sit at October 28. Coming back from there, you'd be sort of setting that rate in sort of October 27 to be commenced in October 28. And that gives businesses a chance to adjust their rates to be reflective of any proposed change that could be occurred.
That makes absolute sense. That's why I've asked the question. Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So you're advocating for a 2-tier levy system. Would you not agree that that could prove rather problematic from the administration point of view?
I can only talk from our business point of view, and the answer would be no, because it's just done off the straight, and through our sort of reservation system. We don't see that. What it's more the focus should be that in the winter months, it is a domestic market only, and even in the last 2 years where summer and winter has been a domestic market only, there's no doubt that the first winter, as we came out of COVID, that the island was a lot busier in the winter months than we probably all would have anticipated. But equally, going into the second winter, numbers dropped back considerably again as people got used to sort of, I guess, travelling when they wanted to travel, not necessarily when the sort of government told us after that first lockout, we almost were under instruction to go out and spend money and support our local communities, which thankfully we did as a country. But we just believe that you've got to have reasons and motivations for people to go to Stewart Island Rockura in the winter months, and part of that motivation is going to be around probably having a competitive rate to get people to come to the island, because bear in mind, most businesses won't be charging the same in winter as they will be in summer, and we just see this as part of everyone sort of working collectively to make the island more viable in the winter months from a destination point of view.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions? Councillor Duffy.
I just wonder on that, do you really think $3 will make that much difference?
Well, I think it's more that the message that it seems that we're in it together, and you're right, $3 possibly not, but equally, if you look at it from the point of view, as a business, we're probably going to have to potentially look at putting packages together, and as soon as you say putting packages together in the shoulder and winter months, look, all of us know that means generally that the rates drop, and if, as an organisation, if we have to almost help do our bit to promote the area and get people to travel to the island, it'd be nice to think that that we're all in it together, you could say, and we're working with it together. I mean, to be honest, whether it's $7 or $10, the amount of money that's going to be raised between May and September towards the visitor levy is going to be what I call the 20% at best, with the 80% raised between October and April. And so, that way, if we can all sort of work collectively in the off season, I think it's I think it's a good approach and a good community and regional approach to take.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Owen.
Thanks, Paul. I was just curious, we had quite a bit of feedback from people around lack of clarification on where the money goes. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on better communication wise, because you're essentially passing on that information to your customers on a regular basis? Are there any improvements or suggestions around transparency in that space?
Yeah, look, I think going forward, that's going to be, I think, quite critical. There's no doubt that it's not going to be too long before a one-way fare to Stewart Island on a ferry in our situation is going to go over $100. And I'd suggest that the visitor levy increase, if it was to 15, is going to be probably part of that tipping point. And part of doing that is you need to explain the reasons and tell the stories. And I might add in a positive way, not in a justifying way. And that would certainly form part of our key messages that we would be sort of telling as part of, why a ferry ride to Stewart Island Refuge as such. I think because the locals have their rates, it's obviously, it's more a message that you're targeting towards the international and probably what I'd say the domestic New Zealand market that travels to the island in the shoulders in the winter months and in summer, but part of that message particularly in the winter month campaigns.
Thank you for that, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Just you've made a couple of comments just around the administration of the whole process, and also just a comment around modernising that, I guess, and you've obviously got some ideas on how that might happen, and some suggestion there around ticket issue by an approved transport operator, so suggesting that we can amend our policy in that regard now too. So have you other suggestions? Because I also note reserving the right for the to administer, to recoup your costs around being involved as an operator in this process.
Yeah, and part of that is again from the time that the visitor levy was first put in to now, we've changed probably to two different styles of reservation booking platforms, and with that, the charges that you pay to the user, the company that you're getting it through changes as well. And we're really just highlighting that on our current platform, there's what I call clip the ticket way that goes through on this. So it's not something that, well, put it this way, but if we didn't do something, we as a business, we would just be absorbing another cost on top of the levy to our reservation system provider.
That you're looking to minimise those costs where you can.
I don't think there's any further questions, Paul, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you for your submissions, and we'll certainly consider your points when we do our deliberations, so appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks very much.
Cheers, have a good day.
Okay, thanks, Abel, thanks all.
Yep, cheers. Darrell Jenkins. Also zooming in. Hi Darrell, how are you?
Hiya. Thank you for having me today. Awesome, thank you. I have submitted on behalf of the Southland branch of Hospitality New Zealand. We are a member-led non-for-profit organisation representing approximately 3,000 businesses across the country, including cafes, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and a lot of accommodation. I won't read out the whole introduction that I've got in my submission. I trust that you have seen that. So I'll crack into our submission. So Hospitality New Zealand is disappointed that there is hardly any mention of the Stewart Island in Southland's destination strategy. Levy increases should be considered within a cohesive strategy for the region. Hospitality New Zealand would in principle accept the increase to the levy. However, we would need assurances that these decisions aren't being made in isolation, considering the levy isn't considered within the scope of the SMDS. It is pleasing to read that Stewart Island had an increase of 26% in visitors from June 2020 to November 2020 on the previous year. We would like Southland District Council to be aware that increasing the levy may disincentivise people to visit Stewart Island. Hospitality New Zealand is disappointed that tourism and hospitalities would be the ones to bear the brunt if visitors were to decrease due to the levy increase. While we appreciate that Council has additional costs incurred through COVID, our members and the wider business community still face huge costs across increased compliance, minimum wage increases, higher supplier costs and local government charges. They need all the support they can get from councils and regional tourism organisations to encourage and increase visitors into the region. Hospitality New Zealand members are asking for some transparency in how the levy revenue is being spent and how the increase would be spent. Lastly, Hospitality NZ would like to know if the 3 approved operators that collect the levy will have a say in what the levy revenue gets spent on. We thank the Southland District Council for the opportunity to provide input into this consultation. Happy to discuss.
Thank you very much. Short, brief and sharp.
You're welcome.
Well done. All right, we'll open up for any questions from the council. Yes, Councillor Ford.
Yeah, thank you very much. And your mention of the operators having a say in the spending, were you aware that the 3 operators are on the committee that do the allocation? So, there is some consideration there.
Great.
Thank you for that clarification. That's good. Any other questions or comments? Well, you've done exceptionally well. There's no further questions. So certainly appreciate your submissions and your time and talking with us. So thank you very much. We'll take those into consideration.
Right. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, cheers.
Cheers. See you.
Bill, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Yeah, been waiting there for a while. Thanks for your patience. Oh, that's good listening.
As you probably gathered, we disagree with this increase in the levy. The main reasons are that I sincerely think it will detract from the appeal of going to Stewart Island. Any increase in price is detrimental to the number of people that are going to go over there. And some people will say the opposite, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Basically, last time you wanted to increase this amount to $15, it was sort of must have brought up around the table, I guess, and $15 came up, and then you couldn't justify it. So then you've gone and done a study, and in that study you've decided, right, we're going to pull all this infrastructure into this amount to try and justify this $15 increase. So we've included essential infrastructure like electricity and sewage that's never been funded by the levy in the past. I had a look through some of the preliminary studies and things on this, and a sample of the infrastructure included in the justification you're all dealing with here. And I had trouble reconciling some of these. There was I just took a sample because it's on page about 450 of the district of the LTP, which I don't know how many people ever get to that number of pages, but I went through it. A couple of them here was the Motorel Braggs Bay toilet. I questioned Kerry Williams about this, and I was initially told it was for 2 toilets. This was then corrected to 1 toilet. I've got a couple of photos of it here. I've been to have a look at it, which is a good thing to do if you're deciding on things, if you want to have a look at some of these. I was also told that every public toilet in the province is refurbished every 15 years and replaced every 60 years. It's just a prefab toilet. I checked some prices on these. The most I could come up with was about $20,000 you can purchase one of these for. Yeah, and your LTP and your project cost, it will be $255,000. The only thing is, I don't think that toilet's 57 years old. I think that's probably only 10 years old, that toilet. So that's just for a refurbishment. So I've just got 2 or 3 of these to go through. But if you actually look at some of these projects and go, where do you come up with this? A little bit of rust on one corner, which probably needs a bit of a paint. But apart from that, it looks pretty good. It's one of the best public toilets I've ever seen. So another one I looked at was the electricity transmission renewal program. The first year includes replacing 4 power poles on the back road. I'm not sure what that's got to do with tourism at Stewart Island. The back road, there's no tourists there. When a tourist stays in accommodation, has a meal, does any activity like such as e-bikes or anything, the cost of the electricity is already built into what they're paying. So effectively, by including this infrastructure in there, you're charging them twice. I don't think that's right. Another one I looked at there was the Over Island Causeway. That needs raised by a metre because sometimes seawater goes over it. There's a short path, probably from this piece here, roughly, not very big. LTP figures, I talked to some contractors over at the island and said they could do quite an elaborate job of raising that for about $50,000. I think it needs to come up by a metre, which is about the height of there. The LTP has got it at 2020. I don't think they've done it though, but it's got it at $598,000. And then there's a further $341,000 in 2025. So as I say, you're basing your decisions here on why you need to raise this levy because of all this expense. And I think you need to really have a great big look at the expense because the expense to me, you can keep that. Yeah, so to have an informed decision on why you need to raise this, you need to have a close look at what you're spending this money on. The other thing is inflation's been mentioned as a reason to increase it because everything's got to go up. Over the last 5 years, the revenue from the levy has increased by 60% due to the increase in visitor numbers. So I'd surely think that that covers the cost of inflation. As I said, we're against the levy because it would deter people from visiting the island. Some of the preliminary consultation documents that we received from the council said that studies have shown that increasing the price will not deter people from visiting the island. I've asked for a copy of these studies, but nobody seems to be able to supply them to me because I actually don't think that exists. Every time you increase the price, that turns people off. Even if 1,000 to 2,000 potential visitors decided against visiting Stewart Island due to the cost, that equates to around $500,000 to $1 million of lost revenue for the island itself, but the businesses on the island, which I don't think is good. As I said, the Stewart Island visitor levy empowering Act was very clear in what it says about the purpose of the levy. The purpose of the Act, this Act, is to provide a mechanism for the council to set and collect levies and maintain revenue from passengers travelling to Stewart Island, Rakiura, in order to better provide services, facilities and amenities for those persons while they are on the island. That's what that Government Act says. And I think you're going well outside the scope by including these other infrastructure costs and things that you're putting on. Just because you've got some money that you can get, you can increase it, you can put that money there. It's just the easy way to do it. So it was never intended to include electricity, roading and sewage when it came to initially making the levy a thing. I think some of you here should probably go and ask Eric Roy if that was the original intention, and I think he would disagree that that was not supposed to be ever included in that. That's about all I've got to say. Just a couple of things with what I've been hearing from some of the other submitters. The footpath at going down to Mill Creek. We've been on the allocation committee now since it started, and it's quite a good thing. You know, looking through some of those applications, some of them aren't very good, some of them are really good. But that particular footpath that everyone's complaining about, we voted to have it on the other side of the road because of continuation of the footpath was already there, and that was the end of the meeting. I thought that was all done, and then all of a sudden it appeared on the opposite side of the road. So now people walk up that road, have to cross the road, walk down this eyesore, which it is an eyesore because it cut all the bush away, and then they go back across the road again at the bridge and carry on. So that's one of the things that as part of that allocation. The other thing that we did last year was we did a tour around some of the assets of the island after we'd had the allocations meeting, and we looked at Observation Rock, and we went down and we looked at the Golden Bay Wharf, and there was boats coming in and out and everything. We're all standing on the wharf, so it's not really falling down here. And I asked everyone there, I said, what's actually wrong with this wharf? And the community board chair said, it's not big enough. I said, big enough for what? He said, it's not big enough for the ferry to use when the weather's no good on the other side, in the Half Moon Bay side. Now, if you want the levy to pay for the ferry to be able to use that wharf on that side, I would say that the ferry should be paying for that wharf itself. Simple as that. Because that is not a good reason to use tourism money on assets. So open to any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate your input there. I'll open up for any questions. Councillor Owen.
Thanks for your submission and coming in to speak for us. I was wondering, you probably heard Paul Norris's submission, but I was interested in the concept of the differential visitor levy charges in the seasons. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it does make a bit of sense, because, and certainly in the wintertime, I know they do, and we have too. Post-COVID, we discounted fares by 10%, $25, and got quite a large uptake on it. As you know, when you reduce the price, more people go, and when you increase it, less people go. So the only thing I'll say that he did say there was that of his reservation service, where they take a cut of the actual fare. We've talked about this for years, is that places like the Eyesights, there's not many of them around now, but the travel agents and the inbound tour operators, they take a percentage of your fare. And always the levy has been, they don't demarcate between where the levy is and where your fare is, they just take 20% off the whole lot. So when the levy's been $5, we pay between, $1 to $1.50 for that, if it's gone through one of those agents. But now you make it $15, so you're getting, we could be paying $3 or $4. It comes out of our own pocket, and always has. So that's not a good thing either. And I don't think it's too difficult or they make it too difficult for the travel agent to say, oh no, we'll just treat that separately. They don't do it. They won't do it. They won't even pay you that. They just pay you the net, the less their commission. So.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you waiting there for a while for us. So
no, that's all right.
Enjoy the rest of the day. We'll take your comments on board. All right. Cheers, man. Thank you. That concludes the submissions participation. We'll take a break. We come back here at 11:05. 10 minutes. Again, is it? Right, we'll reconvene the meeting, and I have to backtrack a little bit because I made an error in the apologies. I never asked for an. I never moved it or got a second, so I'm happy to move the apology, and seconded by Councillor Douglas. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Very thank you for that. And first, that was apologies for the course of the report. Thank you. Go to confirmation of the minutes of the 29th of March, page 6 of your agenda. I'm happy to move that the confirm the minutes of that meeting. Do I have a second for that? Thank you, Councillor Menzies. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. We go to our first report, which is the draft Stewart Island Visitor Levy Policy and Bylaw Hearing Submissions. So we have the report. Do you want to make any brief comment on the report itself? There to remember is that we've heard our submissions this morning, and it's all part of that consultation process that we're going through. And that at the next council meeting, we will be deliberating on the policy itself, and some interesting discussions at that time. I think it's been some interesting views we've heard this morning, good ideas, and I'm sure that they'll come to the forefront at the next meeting. So I certainly look forward to that debate time. So I'm happy to move the recommendation that we received in there's one A, B, C, and D recommendations. So I'm happy to move those recommendations. Do I have a second for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe. Do I have a second for that, please? Yeah. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, carried. Thank you. Councillor Duffy, did you have?
No, I was just going to second it.
Okay, thank you for that.
I was late, of course.
We'll go on to the next report, 7.2 Risk Management Report. And hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Your Worship, Mr. Chair and Councillors. So the purpose of this report is to update Council on the status of its highest risks for the water. So these top priority risks were presented to the Finance and Insurance Committee last month, and they stated their satisfaction they're being appropriately monitored and managed. So once again, COVID-19 did play a large part in shaping the reporting for the quarter. As we transition to the COVID in the community, Council looked to impacts on the organisation as a whole and on how we could deliver to our community. So part of this, the IMT developed a prioritised list of critical services, which enabled mitigations to then be put against Council's ability to operate effectively. The staff wellbeing continue to be monitored, and communication channels have been utilised throughout the organisation to share information updates that come through. You'll note that both the change and reform and the resource and delivery risk areas continue assessed as worsening this quarter. Both these risks are subject to drivers, many of which are out of Council's direct control, and in both cases, many of our mitigations are linked to ways in which we can build and maintain resilience and can continue to deliver to the community in times such as these, times of uncertainty. So these two risks were explored in detail last month as part of the committee's regular deep dive process. And while it was acknowledged that Council is continuing to meet its targets and milestones, given the nature of these two risks, they are likely to remain on active watch for some time. You will note that the COVID-19 risk is a work in progress. Just as I've outlined in the report, the annual review of top risks is about to be undertaken over this next quarter. So that will be fully assessed and brought back to you along with the annual review for the June quarter. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, I'll open up the paper for any questions, discussion, comment. So information paper of a decision process. So open up for any comments. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Just a question. Always interested in reading through the proposed mitigations and noting the completed mitigations, which is helpful. I don't want to assume, but there is a time frame around the proposed mitigations. Understand, and how would we know that they're on track, and whether we need to support in some ways for those to occur, if there's, and how you're addressing the barriers to having them completed, if any.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. You raise a very valid point. We don't actually have a measure in place against them. These are discussed each quarter with the leadership team, and any progress made would have a comment against it. We don't have something in place which actually measures the movement of those, and that is something that we could think through, I think, when we do the review this coming quarter, because I think it is important to note the progress that's been made on those, both the proposed mitigations and those ones that are currently underway.
Thank you. I think that just provides us for some assurance that it is happening.
Thank you. Just thinking back on a conversation we had at one of our last meetings around the Three Waters reform and the risk identified in here around ability to adapt to some of those changing environment. I went back and read the budget information from government, and they do have funding there to assist councils in responding to their requests. So I just suggest that maybe we need a mitigation in there to activate funding. We don't have an application process, but we need to keep on that for them to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In fact, you're absolutely right. I just happen to have the document that was sent through very recently around that Better Off funding package, which has just opened, and the leadership team has been working through how we will prepare some information for council to be in a position to make an application. It is like so many of these things, quite a complicated process, and it's got quite a bit to it, but it's designed to help transition the organisation into a new space after Three Waters, but we've got a bit to do in terms of making sure that the council puts through a compliant application, but one that we're actually confident will deliver for Southland. It's just open and it closes in September. Thank you for raising it.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jane. Just with regard to relationships and reputation, and our trajectory or our planned approach with our borrowing and borrowing to invest in the financial markets, do you see that as having some implications around risk? And do you think that will be reflected in these risk registers in the near future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not entirely sure I'm the appropriate person to answer this. I don't know whether anybody else would like to speak to this.
I think we just need to clarify the point that we're actually not borrowing to invest in the markets. Remember, we're using our reserves have been previously used to fund some of our capital expenditure. We're now changing our policy whereby those monies are being repaid, and then we're investing those to get better returns on them to offset our rates in a lot of cases, as well as provide a better return to our ratepayers.
So the money that is to be invested in the markets, the financial markets, where does that come from?
As previously stated to the council, those monies are reserves. So those are often created from community boards, whether they be from excess funds in a particular year that they've rated for, whether it be from the sale of assets or other such like things. So that's where that monies have come from.
The money's not there at the moment.
Because council previously made the decision to use the funds that were from those reserves to fund its capital program. It has now made a separate decision to separate those two functions and to return those monies back to the reserves in order to get a better return on it, because they can borrow so well now.
Okay, so is there a risk then that we're investing these reserves into the financial markets at a time when asset values are at record highs and at a time when inflation and interest rates are rising rapidly? Is there a risk that we're taking some risk with community resource that could have an impact? We could potentially lose quite a substantial portion of those reserves.
Not, did you
It's
also say?
certainly something we can look at. We'll be looking at each of these risks in some detail over the next quarter, and that is a point that we can certainly explore.
I would be interested to see that, because share markets and bond markets don't traditionally do very well in times of rising interest and rising inflation, particularly when they're already priced at record levels.
Yeah, but it's, you know, the council have already made decisions previously. So manage those funds, stepped off by the council. So we will be discussing it as not a particular paper. Any other comments?
A question, yes. So perhaps for Cameron, this one. I mean, we've had COVID now for over 2 years, and it's still ongoing. So Cameron, how is COVID affecting the running of the organisation right here and now?
Through Mr. Chair, look, thank you for that question. We've been running since COVID became more prevalent in the south. We've been running between 5 and 10% of the staff off ill at any one time, which has been a lower rate than some organisations, but still steady. I'm very proud of the fact that the organisation has continued to provide all its services, with the exception of the library, which went to a click and collect service rather than having the doors open. We aligned that with the government's traffic light system, and now that we're back at orange, we've gone back to normal services at the library. So we reprioritised a few major projects, and we had a realistic look at what would we delay further if the organisation got up to the sort of forecast 30% reduction rate. We had some limitations in terms of operating community boards virtually. We've certainly found the limitations of the rural broadband, and Councillor Ford knows limitations on broadband for rural. We've got through. We're not quite out of the woods in the south yet, but on the whole, we've done pretty well. The priority sectors of water, wastewater, and emergency responses have all been maintained at all levels, irrespective of staffing. And I also want to acknowledge that the contracting community that works on our behalf have well in that respect.
Any other questions? There being none, I'm happy to move the recommendations A to D. Do I have a second for that? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you for that. Next item on the agenda is 7.3. Southland Council's submission draft New Zealand temporary traffic management. Find that on page 359 of your agenda. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. So, as you're aware, probably over the last 12 to 18 months in particular, it's been quite a change in the traffic management area, particularly more focused around the qualification side that people and training. But this paper and submission really looks at the change to actual guide itself and how that's administered across New Zealand. But I'll pass you over to Ben, who's also one of Council's traffic management coordinators. He's one of the functions for Folsom Council, and has been working quite closely through the document.
Thank you. As partly stated, Waka Kotahi has decided to undergo a reform of the traffic management industry in New Zealand. And as part of that, the existing code of practice was considered no longer fit for purpose, and they have opted to develop a new guide. The draft guide was released by Waka Kotahi last month and is currently in the process of consultation and development. However, the consultation period finishes on the 29th of April, allowing for limited time to develop and prepare submission. Due to this, we are requesting delegated authority given to the General Manager of Infrastructure and Environmental Services to finalise and submit on the draft New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management on behalf of Council. The main aspects of the submission will include the stating concerns of the lack of pre-consultation with local authorities during the development of this guide, the interpretation that local authorities as a road controlling authority, will be considered a PCBU for all works within the roading corridor, including private. In addition to that, we will seek clarification under what legislation do we have veto rights and the ability to police these people undergoing these activities within the road reserve. And then finally, one of the majors would be concerns that traffic management compliance will become too burdensome for small contractors to achieve. This is due to the high level of understanding that will be required around the traffic engineering design and the lack of specific guidance that the proposed guide provides. Thank you.
It certainly indicates that it's going to be extremely difficult for smaller contractors to be able to gain work contracts because of the new constraints that are put in place. And that certainly will have an impact on the ability of the contractors to survive out there and provide a service that they have been providing. So it has to be of a major concern to this council. It may place in jeopardy some of those contractors who are currently providing us. So I think during the Services and Asset Committee meeting, I think I requested that a letter be sent to Waka Kotahi NZTA expressing our concerns of the lack of consultation. That only there was, I think, 1 or 2 councils that had been involved. Did that go ahead?
It's under, yes.
So has it been sent?
So one of the things we have been correspondence sent around the time frame around the consultation, the fact what you raised that the limited or road controlling authorities have been involved. So that's been sent, but a follow-up to your request of the follow-up that still needs, I can be correct on this, that a secondary letter on that still needs to go. So as one has already gone, haven't received any response back on that.
That is, we've got a large network here, and we've got a lot of contractors. We've got a big area to look after. So I can see a number of hands that are up. I think Councillor Keys, you had your hand up. No? Right. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've got, like the chairman's already alluded to, I've got some big concerns about this too, not just around the contractors being able to do the work, but the cost of the work actually being done, because the amount of red tape that's going to get introduced. And I think of a relevant example lately where a water pipe was getting fitted in a dead-end street, and more than half the job was spent on traffic management where there were no cars in the street. And the part of this review that I agree with is the fit for purpose part, but I don't think it's going to be fit for purpose. And it concerns me the time frame being so limited. And there's a section in this report that it says community views are unknown. And I think the community is going to feel very strongly about this. And We need to represent and advocate for those communities, and how do we do that in such a short time frame? So I've got some very serious concerns about this.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
So just following on from Councillor Scott's concern, I read in paragraph 3 there, it says after a spate of fatalities. Now is that backed up with facts? We don't want to get too morbid here, but that's emotive language to use, which I think is designed to colour the flavour of the whole report. And I think it's important that we're realistic in our response and that we don't get carried away with an emotional response to paragraph 3. And I'm certainly concerned about the ability of local contractors, smaller contractors to do the work. The other thing I picked up on, and I just can't find it there now, is the risk assessment. Now, to me, if we get back to that example that Councillor Scott raised, a work up a dead-end road, surely somebody, in my opinion, would go in there, do a risk assessment, say the risk is low, therefore the traffic management requirement for that is low, and let's not overprice that sort of work. That it has to be fit for purpose after the risk assessment has been carried out. Is that the way you interpret that wording?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and that should be something that is happening at the moment, but the way the initial code is set out is that if it's a low volume dead end street, if you've sort of assessed that that is what it is, and these are what you do in these sort of situations. But the new code, the new guide is very unprescriptive. So if you go and you'll do your risk assessment and say, well, there's quite a low risk here. So then we can turn around and do what? So will we just put a couple signs up, or are we going to go full hog? But the current guide doesn't provide any direction for these contractors to go towards, and that's the concern. And on a council side of that, especially if we are taking on these risks of these operators within our road reserve, at what level should we accept them to be on our road? What level of risk do we set that level of risk?
Very much, Chair. I suppose maybe just elaborate a bit more on it. So there's two elements. There's one being the private contractors that are not engaged by council that still carry out operations on our network. And then there's obviously contractors that council engages for undertaking, whether it's water, roading, etc. And so we've got a bit more control, obviously, around the contractors we engage versus those that don't. So for those, if we use the example of a contractor, as an example, dead-end road, and they submit a traffic management plan that comes to us and we assess it. So they've carried out a risk assessment. Contractor B, same scenario, they carry out a risk assessment and provide a completely different plan. But then the way the guys propose is we'll have to take a risk assessment on both of those, but there's no best practice in essence that we'd be gauging them against, as is the current case. That's also going to create a bit more, or risk of creating more inconsistencies on traffic management. So yes, fundamentally, we support a risk-based approach. So you do get that fit for purpose, but there's other risks associated with that too, including where the liability then ends up should something occur, because council is going to be required to carry out further risk assessment on that. So,
Councillor Fraser.
Probably no surprise, I'll bring up events and community gatherings and use of road reserves. I think that's something we really want to highlight because increased regulations and costs will basically kill the events, and that's probably not a good thing for our community. So that would be something I'd like to see in the submission. And its size and scale has already been talked about that, but the allowance for size and scale to be considered, and in good clear guidance, I think is critical. Because already compliance costs for events are causing them to stop. So we don't want to see any more stop.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you. Just clarify, have we got an extension to the 29th of April deadline?
We have not received any.
So
application extension.
we will have a submission in, and that will be sufficiently robust to cover the issues that have been raised today and you've already raised on the 29th. So that's the
confident on that.
intention.
We are confident, and hence why I suppose that delegation to GM to I suppose be the final signatory on that if it goes out.
And you've just probably covered the other issue. When I hear the word guide, I think that's kind of gives you kind of direction, but it's not a requirement. But actually, that's always tested when something goes wrong. And we don't want to find ourselves in that situation, but you've just raised that issue. In the past, you've used the guide. Well, it's a code of practice, really. Same thing, which is interpretation of the legislation as it stands.
Yeah, so through Mr. Chair, so the current best practice is, I suppose, a New Zealand standard that's adopted by councils, contractors, etc., as best practice to utilise. So any accidents or associated occur, generally when investigation is carried out, it's compared to the code of practice or the current code of practice. And I suppose that's one of our concerns as well. There's no code of practice at the moment. It's more risk-based assessment, no guide per se or New Zealand standard. Well, how do you compare it and where do you get that consistency?
So in effect, it is a requirement, and with it being so loose and not having that guide, it's actually established through things going wrong, isn't it? That's when you start to get the definition of what is accepted or acceptable within the code of practice. So it is a significant concern. Thank you.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wonder, perhaps it's, well, this government seems to be keen to promote the four well-beings, and this work seems to be flying in the face of, well, at least perhaps two of them. The economic, the Councillor Scott mentioned an example where it's going to make minor works cost prohibitive. So, and then of course there'll be some social impacts. Councillor Fraser's touched on those and more. So, might form part of your
in the letter of response. Should be. Got a note of that. Councillor Duffy.
Yes, well, it's all being said, but I think the rural nature of our district it's quite an important aspect. And I see here in paragraph 11, you refer to stock droving, and I mean it's very important that that's able to continue. And we've just had the experience ourselves of putting a water pipe under a no exit rural road that not a vehicle went past through the whole operation, yet quite stringent requirements around it even under that, and it was only driven under the road, it wasn't open to the road. And a number of people say, oh, you just go ahead and do it, don't, which leads to other problems. And I think there's got to be a realisation that traffic management on Tarshill roads with high traffic volumes is a very different thing to other examples we have a large number of in our area.
Councillor
I don't know. I've just got me and my computer had a bit of a dispute the other day after the first draft traffic management thing, and a wee bit of a sort out. It was not currently feasible for small town operators to procure a health and safety plan and certification for projects under some $20,000. To overcome this and comply with some of these poorly thought out regulations, we are forced to employ large out-of-town companies. 3 employees travelling 100 k's on a round trip is something like 6 hours travelling plus vehicle time in the vicinity of $400 dead time for say 4 times a year, $1,600. We have some 16 small affected villages, approximately $25,000 before we lift a spade. I ask, is this the action of efficient and effective time and money management? Probably not. It changes the whole picture.
No, well said, Councillor Harper. Well said.
Thank you. And George has put his finger on some of that. I was going to ask, cost of traffic management changes, and how is that monitored? Can people take shortcuts, or what happens to it? The traffic management plan. We've got staff that are additional staff that are going to monitor it. What's going to be?
So, Chair, and yeah, as these compliance and requirements go up, pressure on internal staff to continue to sign off on those plan and reviews. And I suppose that's one of the points I highlight around the risk assessment. That's going to add further to that requirement if there isn't any good guidance around what we're reviewing. Because over the last 12 to 24 months, we have seen a steady increase in the number of traffic management plans coming to council, which is good. It shows people are taking note of their requirements as a PCBU to keep the public safe, but it's definitely putting more pressure internally, which was traditionally has been a tack on roll to a lot of activities we do. But, yeah, the landscape's definitely changing.
Well, my community board are promoting that people mow their own grass verges. Plan on that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. I think you need to be careful. Just a word of, well, it isn't just a word of caution. If something were to, untoward, no, excuse me. If something untoward were to happen, who's at risk? Who's at fault?
But,
I mean, it sounds nice.
It's saying do that very thing.
You
And
just need to be careful when you allow things like that, because there is a risk associated with that. It's a nice thing to do. I appreciate that.
it's the direction of the board.
But it's
Currently.
we look at that in a different forum. Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Just sort of following on that, I think it relates to a lot of, especially what Councillor Fraser was talking about as well, but it's the level of qualifications required to actually submit the traffic management plans, especially for events and those smaller garden contracts, all those sorts of things, because and at the moment, it's way too high, and we've experienced that in some of our smaller communities, and I think it puts off a lot of people from doing those events. So increasing the red tape isn't necessarily going to increase the quality of what comes out, and enabling people to actually come up with sound traffic management plans without necessarily having to have 7 layers and 7 stages of a traffic management course to get verified by council or someone else. I think it's important to feed that in as well, because at the moment there's very limited people in the district that can actually do those sorts of plans at the required level.
Councillor Harper.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Is there any, Ben, is there any mention made about with the traffic corridors? We have the road corridor and the traffic corridor, which is 2 different places as far as I'm concerned. So that's the road in the middle there, and the piece on the outside is it's dead ground. Quite often you've got a road, you've got a footpath in a garden, and technically you can't do that garden without. So is there any way that we can put the traffic corridor, emphasise the traffic corridor, not the road corridor, because quite often the road corridor can be, say, 20 metres wide, and the traffic corridor is only 10 or 8. So if you're a metre off the road corridor, sorry, if you're a metre off the traffic corridor, should we reduce the risk of any accidents happening?
For you, Mr. Chair, currently the current code, and I imagine it will be the same for going forward, is basically any activity that affects the whole road corridor needs a traffic management plan. But even similar to, like, if you're risk assessing it, or if you're using the current guide to do it, you employ the different level of traffic management. So if you're working far away from the side, I think it's 5 metres, that you just need to have a sign up saying that you're there, and a truck. Of course, that depends on this is the minimum, and depends on the level of road. But then as you get closer to the traffic lanes, the requirements increase. So yes, you need it for the whole corridor, but depending on where and what you're doing, it changes the level of traffic management that you need.
Of course, there's one big difference between Auckland and Tuatapere and our rural towns. Just the one up there, so you realise that.
Yeah, roundabouts. Yeah. Councillor Keast.
People want to live in one.
Thank you, Chair. My recollection is that we had recommended a high level delegation to Wakakohe. So is that, what happened with that? Is this the letter we're talking about? That may or may not have gone.
Well, that's why I asked about the letter. Delegation hasn't occurred to my knowledge.
I can assure you it's going.
Oh, okay.
Hasn't gone already.
No, I've only just got back and dealing with other matters and the team provided it to me over the Easter break.
The sooner it goes, the better it is. All right, I just think we'll refocus on the report and its recommendations. And, the recommendation D is probably the most pertinent one, which agrees to give delegated authority to the, and it says general manager, should be group manager, so we'll make that amendment, of infrastructure and environmental service to finalise and submit on the draft New Zealand Government Management on behalf of the council. So you've got some very clear signals and messages from this council meeting and the previous Service and Asset Committee meeting. So I think you've got a handle on that. So that the submissions that will be sent to NTA will certainly reflect feelings on it. Yep. So I'm happy to move the recommendations, but also note that the change in D is from general manager to group manager. So do I have a seconder for those recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Douglas. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you. Good discussion. The next item is 8.1, Lockhill School grant application, school sports facility. Thank you. 365 of the agenda. The recommendations are on 3.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, Deputy Mayor Kramer and councillors. I'll take this report as read and just make the following comments. This is to consider a recommendation from the Arete Community Board to approve an application from Lockhill School for $5,000 towards the upgrade of the Lockhill School sports shed from the Winton Wallace Town Ward Reserve. The committee needs to secure a third of the total cost of the project, which is approximately $104,514, excluding GST, before other funders will accept applications for the balance. The shed is not a Ministry of Education asset. It's used by the community and specifically Central Pirates Rugby Club and the Winton Croquet Club along with the school. This upgrade is to bring the shed up to code. The Arete Community Board does not have the delegation to approve expenditure from the Winton Wallace Town Ward Reserve and wishes to recommend to council that a grant of $5,000 be approved for this project, conditional on all other funding being secured. Happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fraser, I just know that you've been made reference within the report. Do you wish to add anything?
Yeah, fully supportive of the project, and I think it's in light of what could be happening with the drill hall. It's a good investment into the community that could replace a facility that's being used now, and there's real potential for it to be used a lot more. So I think it's signalling to the community that we care and value that space, and divesting gives us a scope to help.
Thank you for that, Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Chair. I think this sounds like a great project. The community have done really well and from funds from elsewhere. The sad part about it is that they actually have to come to us to get it to spend the money. I think that the community board's shown really good leadership here and that they should have been able to just approve it themselves. So that will be a story for another day. But yeah, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Excellent. Couldn't agree more with your later comments as well. We need to figure out how we can streamline things a little bit better. And that's certainly an opportunity for the next training. How do we and how can we make some changes to make it put more easier, but still to have the accountability. But I agree with you. Councillor Menzies, before I put.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just two things. One is may wonder why the Ministry of Education required to bring up to code, but this building is actually our Ministry of Education land, although it's not their asset. So it's for the community and to bring it to code. Not that that's a bad thing, but secondly, if we can look at the ability of the community board to take this through the whole process themselves sooner than the next triennium, I would encourage that to occur. Is there a way in which that can occur?
So through you, Mr. Chair, that process has already started. The Reti Community Board made a resolution at their meeting to ask staff to progress looking at how the community board could look at being in charge of distributing the funds from that reserve, and that process has started within the staff.
Thank you, because it's applicable to all community boards and has been a discussion point for some time.
Yes, that's correct.
Really need to look at the delegations policy. So it's not that they flick a switch. Sooner the better, I understand that. We've got to make sure that we tick the right boxes. So as I say, that accountability. So I've got a mover. Oh,
Mr. Chair, just to let you know, staff are doing a review of the delegations authority. So if there's any council members that have some feedback, please forward that through to Fran, and she'll be able to start working through that with staff. So we're aware of some of the constraints with the community board that raised with us. So it is under review at the moment.
Oh, thanks for that. Aware of that.
Yes. This must be related to that.
Through you, yes. This is about financial delegations, but the body of work around the roles and responsibilities between council and the community is part of that process, which is underway.
This is a separate process then.
This is the financial delegations for our community board council. So the general theme here is the community board should have been able to just do this on their own, but because of the technicality, it has to come here for.
Just to correct that, the community board couldn't because it's not a community board reserve. It's actually a council reserve.
Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Good done. Good points raised there. 8.2 dog registration fees. It's on page 371 of your agenda. Who's going to speak to that?
Good morning, Councillor Kramer.
Oh, you're on mute.
Right now.
Yeah, I thought I heard her.
Can you hear me now?
Just.
I'll try and turn it up. Is that better?
That's good. I can hear you.
Great, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Erin Keeble, the Acting Manager for Environmental Health. And so what you have before you is the report regarding increasing dog registration fees for the upcoming year. So I'll take that as read and just make a few introductory comments for you. The short point is that we're proposing to increase the registration fees from a base fee for non-working dogs will be increased from $50 to $53, and the fee for working dogs will go from $40 to $41. Just to give you an idea, in terms of the council resources that are used to carry out our obligations under the Dog Control Act. So there's a manager, myself, 2 full-time and 1 part-time dog control officers, as well as an environmental services coordinator. Support services are provided by our contractor Armagard, so they do a lot of the after-hours work for us. And we also have the Pound with recent or upcoming efficiencies that we're going to make in this space include introducing a tag for life. So there will be savings that we'll be able to make once we implement that. We're currently coordinating with Gore and Invercargill City Council about how that might be implemented throughout the district. So that will result in efficiencies in staff time and reducing waste as well. We also have customer services are dealing with a lot of the inquiries that are generated around dog registration time. So we've really made some efficiencies in dealing with those aspects of dog registration. That's pretty much the basics. If you've got any queries, please let me know.
All right, we'll open it up for any questions or comments. Councillor Menzies, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Just a matter of clarification. I see the costs for next year's budget are similar to the current year. We're talking about a reduction in customer services time, presumably going down from 100 hours a week. But there's a projected increase in the reserve of 51,000, but we're putting costs up. So I don't think we're looking to increase the reserve around this, are we? So how is that addressed with the budget for the next year?
Good question. That's the question there.
Is Leslie here? Leslie Smith?
No.
No. Sorry, the sun's in my eyes.
Do you have any?
I was just trying to have a quick look at it. The only thing that I do remember, of course, was remember we had a large negative reserve.
Yes.
And so
yeah, so a loan was drawn down to last year to correct that position. So a loan of 178,915 was drawn down on the 30th of June to correct that reserve position.
So this increase in the reserve will actually be decreasing the debt on the reserve as opposed to increasing. Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
I think we need to come back. Yes, I see how it reads. Yeah, I haven't looked at this previously.
We need to assure our ratepayers that we're not increasing the reserve while increasing the costs. Not that they.
You're right what you're saying, absolutely. Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Erin, I see there the tag for life paragraph, and that should result in significant cost savings if that gets a good uptake. Have you got any sort of percentage figure as to what that might save if there was a big uptake on a tag for life?
No, we're just about to undertake a consultation process with other councils that have implemented this, and that will be one of the aspects that we look at closely in terms of how it's affected the costs. But it is anticipated that it will reduce it. I can't give you any solid information just yet.
Scott.
Chair, just for clarification on page 377 in the financial breakdown, the difference between staff costs and internal expenses. Like I noticed that internal expenses seems to sort of yo-yo up and down a little bit over that 4-year period.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include staff costs, doesn't it? Or is it different?
It's different. Staff costs in the about 4 lines up under direct expenditure.
So what makes up the internal expenses then?
So internal expenses in the previously was for other services across council. So there would have been a partial for my accounting team. There would have been also a partial for customer service staff to undertake those activities as well. So, sorry, what page did you say you're on?
377.
377. So there was a drop. drop in that, and that was basically because of the changes that they made to the way they were collecting the dog registration fees. They didn't require as many services from customer service as was previously needed, and that's why that last year has dropped way.
So it's like using it online and that.
Yeah, it was just a review of that total service that they undertook, and they just realised they didn't need as much as they.
So am I right in understanding that that's to ensure that it's a user pays component for the dog control of the staff time that it takes up across the organisation?
Correct.
Yes.
Any other questions? So the recommendations are, as you can see, are on the page 371, 372, 73. Detailed. I have somebody that would move those recommendations. Support. Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Very second for that. Thank you, Councillor Fraser. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Yeah.
Just because I thought that Anne was going to be coming back with explanation of what was, because it appears from a report that the reserves are being built up, but we're putting charges up, and so I thought we were going to have some clarification.
Do we need to wait for that?
Look at that budget on page 377. It shows going from the deficit, and then at the end of June this year it's 14,000, and the following year 51, and then above that there's those adjustments which I presume are to do with the loans. So it's not exactly what we're happening for it.
No, it's not.
Then, if we look to page 373, it tables there what the reserves are moving to over time. 2031 at 220k.
Oh, to 2031. Yep. All right. If I was a bit soon with that recommendation, then if the councillors wish to wait until we find additional information, receive additional information on this, then I'm happy to that we move to reverse that recommendation, so that it gives staff the opportunity to come back to council and that this report lies on the table until we receive the additional information. Comfortable with that?
I'm happy with that, providing that still leaves enough time for council to increase the fees, otherwise if they are necessary.
When's the next council meeting? It's early May. 11th of May. So I think we've got enough time that if it's retabled at the 11th of May with the additional information, I think that provides sufficient time. Yep. So I'll move that we rescind the previous recommendation. I'll ask for a second for that. Please thank you, Councillor Owen. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you, Councillor Owen, for bringing that to my attention. Appreciate it. The next agenda item is item 8.3, financial report for the period ended 28th of February.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, councillors. Today I'll present the financial report for the period to 28th of February 2022. I will take this report as read. The purpose of this report is to provide council with an overview of the financial results for the 8 months to 28th of February 2022. I'd just like to note that the February forecasting changes that were approved at the 29th of March council meeting are not reflected in this report, but will be reflected in the March financial report, which will be presented at the 11th of May council meeting. Operating income as at the 28th of February is 2.8 million, or 4% below projection for the year to date. Some of the reasons for this variances are the corporate services income is lower than projection, as we've previously discussed a number of times, and council staff have been working through this and will provide an update on the impact of this in the March financial report. Stormwater income is 1 million lower than projection. Although we've received all these stimulus grant monies, we're not recognising it as income until the costs are incurred. The recognition of this income is phased at the start of the financial year to match the expected timing of the stimulus project costs. The projects are still on track to be completed by June 2022, and the income will continue to be released as the work's completed. Operating income was 4.8 million or 4% lower than below projection for the year to date. Some of the reasons for these variances are the community leadership operating expenditure was 725,000 less than projection, predominantly due to staff vacancies, and additionally councillors' travel and mileage costs, conference costs and catering were lower due to less travel and face-to-face meetings as at the 28th of February as a result of COVID-19 restrictions. Streetscape costs were 288,000, 31 under projection. This is a decrease of 7% from the previous month. The majority of this is a combination of reduced costs coming through the gardening, mowing and street litter bins. And a portion of this is partially due to the timing of some of the invoices being received, and these were looked at through the forecasting and adjusted accordingly. Additionally, tree and hedge maintenance was behind schedule, however, is expected to increase as we move into autumn. The parks and reserves are 182,823 or 15% less than projected, with a number of the maintenance projects had yet to be completed by the 28th of February, which contributed to the underspend. And as discussed, the investment operating costs, which were 918,000 lower than projected. As mentioned above, council staff will provide an update on this in the March report. Capital expenditure was 5.8 million or 21% lower than projection for the year to date. Some of the reasons for these variances are toilets, 1.8 lower than projection. The toilet capital program projects have just started to be delivered from February and have been scheduled to be completed by the end of June. The refurbishment projects of the Waikawa, Edendale and Curio Bay toilets have all started and are well on their way to completion, with the new Colic Bay toilet has now been installed as well. Stormwater capital costs were 1.1 less than projection. The capital program is all currently related to the stimulus work, with projects occurring costs slightly behind the phase budget. The commencement date of the Woodlands project's been deferred to align with the school holidays to minimise disruption with the school, and is still expected to be completed by the end of June. The Edendale Wyndham project was behind the phase budget. However, this work has commenced and all the stimulus projects are on track to be completed by 30th of June 2022. The water supply capital costs are 1.2 under projection, largely again to the phasing of the timing of the project costs. With the projects in Tiana being behind budget, with the Lakefront Drive project costs, final costs to be expected in March, will be reflected in the March report. And the Caswell Road water main project only recently commenced, so the variance to the budget's timing. Council had 7.29 million funds on call as at 28th February 2022, with 9.5 million invested in term deposits and had 16.8 million of external borrowings with LGFA. I will now take any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. We'll open up for any questions from any of the councillors.
The question. I'm just puzzled on page 391. There's under the second bullet point, it's got there that this is partially due to the Falcon 22 timing of invoices. Is that a package or what is that?
I think that's just a typing error, as it wasn't on one of my original copies. I think when things have been PDF'd, we may have just had a copy over merge of a paragraph. So apologies about that.
Okay. Everybody else comfortable with the Councillor Menzies?
Thank you, Chair. Just noting that despite the delays to many projects because of the inability to access the materials on time, we do have a completion of some projects. Just advised earlier that the Winton Library project is more or less completed, so we look forward to the opening of the library hopefully sometime in April, and we'll get advice of that. Sorry, in May. 3 days. Still time.
There's still time, exactly. Maybe on the free biscuits though.
Very good point. Thanks for those comments.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great. I've just on page, just looking at the assets and the way you value the water infrastructure. I'm wondering how that's valued and how that relates to what the government's proposing to pay us for.
Just confirming what page was that, sorry?
13. Sorry, my statement of
398 on that.
398.
Oh, so just looking at our balance sheet?
yes, the asset is
Property, plant and equipment.
property, plant and equipment. Thank you. How is the water infrastructure?
So our key infrastructure assets are revalued on an annual basis.
And how does that value compare with what the government's proposing to pay us for?
They were proposing to pay us anything.
I haven't heard a figure from them yet, so we don't know that yet. So your question may be just slightly premature, but all I'm saying is that we haven't had an offer, so we don't really know yet. I'm sure that's something we're keeping a very close eye on. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say the expert, an expert on that is unable to be at the meeting today, so I'm sure there will be many opportunities before the water infrastructure transfers for us to understand that better. I don't think we can provide you with a detailed answer right now.
Okay, I'm looking for an answer.
Good. Yeah, good. Keep looking. Yeah. Keep the finger up there. All good. Somebody like to move that we accept the recommendation A. Thank you, Councillor Owen. And that was seconded by Councillor Menzies. All those in favour, please say aye. Okay. Carried. We'll go to public excluded. So if we can, I'll move that we go into public